Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruhu wa nusalli ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim tasliman kathira. Amma ba'd wa amal. Thank you for your patience, and I'm happy that we're back. And inshallah, the intention for today was to continue from last night's talk, the topic of that talk, which we were attempting to unfold as an unfolding of this specific topic of what we had said, in terms of the title in Arabic, Latifa Insaniya, wal Ma'ad Fis Huluk, that is, the subtle nature of the human soul, in its return unto God through spiritual wayfaring, through the spiritual journey. And the specification here is that as we enter this realm of existence, we are naturally and ontologically, existentially, at every moment, returning back to God. The real test of ourselves in this life is to consciously wake up and understand the situation and begin to work on ourselves, to do the inner work spiritually, so that we may return unto God in a favorable way, in a way that allows us to realize our real meaning as the human state, as and in the human condition. That meaning is intimately connected with our divine origin, meaning our origin with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then the expression of the stages of our existence as a soul into the intermediate realms, and then into this outer lower realm. And then as we begin journeying back as a full human being, back unto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the gate of the bodily death, and then in the intermediate realm again as we wait for the greater resurrection, and then the post-human states of the afterlife, of the akhirah. And then ultimately, as we suggested, a return unto the divine presence, in essence. I won't go into that, but I wanted to give this background. And so this is the general or the ontological ma'ad. We are returning unto God constantly, perpetually, from the moment of our existence, from the moment of our manifestation, our creation, even from the moment of the intention of God to existentiate us, as in the Latin, to stand out of what? Stand out of God's being. For we were first a fixed entity in the pre-eternal knowledge of God. And that is an amazing matter. That's a miracle. And so the whole drama of human existence is this unfolding, right? So this is the ontological aspect of what we're discussing. But we're in this particular talk, as in last night, we began to speak of also the more conscious spiritual return of the human soul back unto God, to take advantage of the free will that we now have in this realm, as a potentially awakened soul, as an awakened spirit, to consciously work on ourselves, to realize more fully, the reality of our meaning, as insan, as the Latifa Insaniya, as this very subtle nature that is the human state of existence, right? In the particular and the unique soul that we have, that God created. So we got to this particular point, in the talk, and I wanted to begin from here. In this context, we discussed that as the uniqueness of our own souls begin to descend, as in the arc of the descent, from the divine realms to the intermediate realms, and then to the like the lower world, the dunyai, this particular world realm. And we are physically embodied, and at each stage we are embodied in some way in a subtle body, which we discussed and we will not review. We then begin this return back, but at each stage we are not only acquiring a body, we are acquiring a layer of due to the body, a kind of layering to our essential innate substance, and subtle center of consciousness, which was first one, but now is beginning to have shadows of itself because of the embodiment that we are receiving on each realm until we get to the physical realm, and we have a physical casing, a physical body, and that in of itself, in this process, produces multiple subtle centers of the human consciousness, right? We have a bodily consciousness, we have a mental consciousness, we have a cardiac consciousness, if you want to call it that, which opens to the spiritual consciousness. So we have an emotional consciousness and then a spiritual consciousness. But we were first only a spiritual consciousness, a pure spirit. Right? And so as we come into this realm, there is this embodying and thereby a further kind of layering of multiple, or the birth to multiple subtle centers, right? So we go from one latifa, one subtlety, which is at essence always the same subtlety and same reality, the hakika insaniya, one could even say here, the reality of insan, of mankind, of the human state, to multiple subtle centers of human consciousness, right? As we've just, kind of outlined, right? To give examples. And so there's something to be said about that, but in that is the very process as we begin ascending, a kind of a process of reversal where we need to learn by spirituality and by the spiritual path and by following the formal religion to integrate ourselves and to learn to unfold or uncover and awaken these inner centers, which now are lying dormant in the substance of our being and our consciousness. We need to learn to somehow awaken them so that we can be reintegrated into the fullness of the human state, inward and outward. Right. So this is where I'd like to, in this context, begin. In this context, let's go back to the Faradaniya, or let's speak of Sayyidina Adam, the first man, the Prophet Adam. And let's speak about his faradaniya, his singularity, his specialness, the uniqueness of him, both in the general Islamic context and in the spiritual context, in the suluki, Sufi context. Why is this so special? I'm speaking of the faradaniya of Sayyidina Adam because, as we've just mentioned, me and you and I, we are finally embodied in this realm. So meaning we were a pure spirit, and then we, in stages, we acquired a body to the same soul that then comes into this particular realm and then is beginning to perform in some way the spiritual work. This is where the conscious work is done, well, whatever you're doing, and whether you know it or not, right? And this then has effects on, the rest of your human destiny as we return unto God. Interestingly enough, not so for Adam from this point of view. What do I mean by that? His creation, in a sense, did not happen in stages per se. This is a very interesting and important fact or reality that is often overlooked. He was made as a pure spirit with a body, right? In the Quranic account. We acquired the body later, and then therefore now then and in the dunya we begin to realize the fullness of the human state. However, Sayyidina Adam was whole from the beginning, and when the spirit was blown into the body, he awakened, he quickened, and he awakened according to the mythic narrative of the Quran as well as the Bible and other spiritual wisdom traditions. So there's something interesting and very unique in this, that the Adamic state, the primordial state, was already present in, you could call, the subtle or the earthly paradise. That was the first paradise. We seek to return to the original paradise in everything that we do in life. This seeking for happiness, this sense of like the need for happiness, for fulfillment, is a need to return to the original paradisial state, spiritually speaking, because our soul knows we're from somewhere else, right? But in Adam's case, in Sayyidina Adam, the Prophet Adam, the first man's case, he was both spirit and bodily form, right? And so there's something to be said about this faradaniya, that in fact, for some amazing reason, in paradox, the subtle nature of the human state involves the inmost inward and the outmost outward in combination, as if to say the first and the last. We will harp on this. We'll express and expound this particular principle, perhaps for tomorrow. Most, certainly, inshallah, we will, when we speak with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But we'll put this point to the side. But the point is here that he was special, and so his ruh, as it came in by the divine command into the physical outer body made of clay, and we know this was his outer body at that time because of what Satan said about him. So he was in his fullness entirely in ahsani taqweem, and apparently asfala safilin, by the quality of his body that was made of the earth, the humility of the earth. Right. This is very important. There's many commentaries, very beautiful in Muslim scholarly commentaries and Sufi commentaries by Maybudi and Samnani. Samani, I'm sorry, that speak of this and really very beautifully bring this out, about the combination of pure spirit and humble earth, and how these two combined make the secret of man. And so I want to make this point that this is the Fardaniya of Sayyidina Adam, and he was pure spirit and physical earthly body from the beginning, right? Yet we are not. We were spirits first, and when we descend into this realm, into the physical realm, then we become embodied. And now we've actually entered entirely the human state. And it is perhaps for this reason that when we've hit this lowest realm, we begin ascending. Why didn't we not ascend before? It's because we did not reach our potential until the pure spirit from the divine command is embodied in the lowest of the low, right? Ahsani taqweem and asfala safilin. We were made from the highest of statures, and we were subjugated, sent down to the lowest of the low. It's in this combination, in this paradox of highest of the high and lowest of the low, that the khasiyat, the specialness, the fardaniya, the uniqueness of the human state, the primordial state of the human being, personified by Sayyidina Adam, this is what makes it special. This is what makes, insan something so unique, so distinct from not only all of outward and dunyai, worldly creation and physical creation, but also from the angels. There is not this possibility in them. And so there's a greatness in this. And metaphysically speaking, it's the completion of a synthesis of all the divine names into one being. And this is what makes man, as in the universal man, al-insan al-kamil, so unique, so special, so great, that we somehow manifest a synthesis of all the divine self-disclosures of his names in one being, right? And this is a very important kind of Sufi teaching, Islamic teaching, in regards to the mysteries, the subtleties of, and the hakika, insaniya, right? Not just the latifa. I could, add here like hakika insaniya, like the reality of the Adamic state, which we can call the primordial state. Right? And so it's important to understand this and to connect this with that. Once we have a body, we are now complete, like a physical body, not just a subtle psychic body or an imaginal body coming from some other realm, like in the intermediate realms. But we're in the physical realm now, and the soul or the spirit, the human spirit, is now embodied in the physical body, as a baby at birth, for example. Now we begin the conscious return, the conscious journey, that journey of spiritual ascension, the arc of ascent. It could not have to begun earlier than that. We were descending until we reached our possibility, our potential, right? Our juz'i potential, right? We speak of the akali, kulli, and juz'i, the partial or the potential intellect, and then we have the actualized or awakened intellect, right? So like intellect really here means spirit. We can superimpose these two terms. I was using a philosophical term, but from the language of revelation of religion, it's really spirit. It's the potential of the human spirit finally is in a locus of manifestation where it now can begin developing as a man, meaning capital M-A-N, as a human being in the human state. And then, so therefore, there's growth and the development and the maturation physically and psycho-emotionally and even spiritually of the human soul, or of this soul in the human state. So this is an important kind of subtlety that is important to speak of. So in this context, when a seeker who has been, or when a soul has been on this trajectory of the sayr, ilallah, like their journey existentially towards God, it's here where they awaken and they take a more conscious role in the owning up to their self-awareness and their autonomy, in free will and their agency, right? And it's here where in Islamic teachings that the sacred law becomes bound upon them, that now the sacred law is bound on them, that they must follow it as a kind of, kind of a moral and religious burden, a taklif, accountability, because of the awakening of intellect and a sense of self-awareness and autonomy and self-agency, that now we are responsible for the choices we make and the actions that we perform. And so then we are bound by the sacred law. This is in other words, in the technical terminology of Islamic theology, spirituality, and metaphysics, we acquire our acts now, right? There's an acquisition here of our acts, right? Due to this sense of self-awareness. And so we are morally responsible towards ourselves so that we don't harm ourselves and others. And beyond harming, to act so responsibly that we live in a noble way, in an ennobled way, and to strive to cultivate noble character. This would be the general state of insaniya, of the human being who has awakened intellect and understands that there's a way to try to strive to live for the truth, in truth, however we understand that, whether Muslim or non-Muslim. This is the birth of a sense of morality and ethics. Like there's verses of the Quran that speak of this, right? That the soul that has knowledge of its good and evil, that has been inspired in it, right? Because the soul has an awareness of this, and it just has to struggle, right? Like successful is the one who purifies themselves, right? قد أفلح من زكاها وقد خاب من دساها, right? This is but كذبت ثمود بطغواها. I mean, so these are the verses that are pointing to this, and the soul that has been inspired with good and evil, or with what is good and what is not good. So the soul begins to have an awareness of this. Where does it have this? It's an innate knowledge connected to the shining of intellect in it, which is rooted in its ultimate source as spirit, that contains this kind of awareness of God as the ultimate good. And so every soul has this capacity, but the capacity lies dormant and may be stunted and needs revelation, according to Islamic teachings, for full fruition of character, of self-awareness, of the awareness of the reality of things and what needs to be done in this life and for the next. Right? And so we need the help of revelation for this. So, understanding the fardani of Sayyidina Adam is very important here, and also now the work, the inner work or the spiritual work that needs to be done by the human soul that has awakened to this possibility, right? Very important and this really is where now we are speaking of the conscious return of the soul that is now understanding that it may have this soul, our soul may have worked in the world, has developed itself to adulthood, has become morally responsible, maybe financially independent, may even have a family, may have reached certain accolades of the worldly life, and understands now, or even before that there's something missing. Something's just not complete. And there's a seeking that begins. First, there was a seeking for the world, for fulfillment, but after understanding that these things are important but do not bring us the real happiness that we're seeking, we begin seeking that somewhere, right? This is the awakening of the seekers, or the seeking spirit of the spiritual seeker, right? The irada, as we would say, of the soul. right? For God, a kind of longing for our source, from whence we came. Our originality. We, as as the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam stated in paraphrase, so we are strangers in this world. So there's an awareness of being a stranger here. So we are aware somehow by self reflection and inquiry and intuition that we are not from here, and that nothing actually here will entirely fulfill our purpose, our meaning of what we are, of this hakika insaniya, of this hakika and latifa insaniya. And so then we begin the spiritual quest, you could say, right? In some way, shape, or form. We may begin to practice our religion a little bit more. We may look for self-help. We may try to find paths out there. We may try to find a teacher. We may try to understand ourselves, to try to curb our behavior. We don't like a particular behavior, to whatever it may be. There's this sense of objectivity towards ourselves, right? Sometimes we get so stuck in that there's even negative states of self-blame and these things that occur. Right? But now, let's say that we have found a religious path and a spiritual path, so a religious framework and a spiritual path, and we found a teacher who has then, initiated us or connected us to a spiritual tradition of what we call Sayyid was Haluk, spiritual wayfaring, a more conscious spiritual return and spiritual work to work on our souls so that we arrive at God here and now and at the bodily death and there and then in a more beautiful and perfected state, the state that we seek as a return to our original hakika and reality. May that be the case for all of us. Ameen, Ya Rabbal Alameen. So this then is what we call suluk, and it's an awakening and the transition from a conscious awareness, from an ontological to a conscious awareness of our journeying in some way towards God and our final ends, to a more conscious working with this kind of journeying, seeking to align ourselves and perfect ourselves, to beautify ourselves. And it is what the Sufis term the second journey, in connection to a spiritual master, a teacher who opens this way of the inner heart, which is considered the second spiritual journey of the human soul. The Sayyid Fillah, this journey, spiritually speaking, in God's presence. The teacher connects us to this possibility. Even if it's virtual for us, we're participating in some way by virtue of the presence and the attention of the teacher who has realized this and is helping us with it by virtue of the connection to the practices and the rhythms and the routine of spiritual practice, and the returns to the suhbah and spiritual companionship. All of these things foster a sense of presence and openness of heart, being in the heart more, which is where the journeying is occurring. We may have just been a body then, or an intellect then, a mindful person struggling with our vices, but now there's a particular sense of a heart, spiritual heart opening, in which we are on the path. Right? This is the second journey of the human soul. This may, in your lifetime, lead to the journey of returning back to the world and creation and your life in a more integrated state. The third journey, Sayyid Allah, your journey with your realized awakenness of God's presence that is with you predominantly, and this then begins to help us assimilate and integrate all aspects of our life and being, which is important to understand. Right? And so I wanted to speak of this kind of element even more. Let's turn now to, and before I do this, as a side note, some may sometimes ask, why is it at that point that then we begin ascending? I think I spoke to that. There's an interesting philosophical doctrine, a position of al-Sadra that speaks of al-Harakat al-Jawhariya, which is a doctrine of transubstantial motion, that it's only at a particular moment that like the way that insan is made, because of the latifia, the subtle nature of insan, kind of, or of man, that only that it can move through various kind of substances or accidents and arrive at what is called a transubstantial motion to realize its full substance. This is philosophically demonstrated, but I wanted to put that term out there for anyone who is philosophically inclined, that this particular mystic philosopher, sometimes called a theosopher, a philosopher Sufi, very brilliantly demonstrated this by logic, by demonstration, by Burhan, in a very profound way. So I'll put that to the side. It's not entirely relevant, but it's interesting because it fits into this kind of understanding of this. What's really occurring is this transubstantial motion of the human soul and its archetype as it is being embodied layer by layer, stage by stage, and then it reaches, God willing, its full potential realization. And the question of how can this be the same entity? How can this be the same essence? For the essence of an apple does not change. It is what it is at every stage, right? Or like something like this. But man appears to be changing until they're here, and even in the physicality and the inward state of a man can be like an animal, can be like a snake, can be like an angel. What's going on? And this is just the mystery of the human state, that it contains all possibility. And so he demonstrates this very beautifully by a notion that he calls like transubstantial motion, that even the substance can transform without kind of losing the logicality of it being a substance. So this goes back to substance and accident. And so I'm not going to get into that. It's also beyond. I used to study these things years ago, and they're very beautiful. But it's just for like the intellectual who's interested. It's out there, right? So turning to this inner work, this spiritual work now, this conscious return. We mentioned how there's a kind of layering, what could be called these extrinsic limitations to the consciousness of this ultimate subtle substance that is the sir, or the secret, or the pure spirit that came from God into the soul of a human body, right? When we are embodied here, we now have, you could say, multiple layers or levels of self-identification. Right? There's the physical body, like that I am this physical body. I am this person, right? You're this one person, you're a distinct person, I'm a person. So we have these layers of separate identification. Even inside of this one physical person, I have a mind and it is thinking. And that's also a kind of identity. I am thinking while I'm also physically maybe doing something. So these are layers of selfhood occurring. I may be feeling something at the same time. And there's the emotional body, as sometimes it's called, or the emotional center. So we have a physical center of self, or a physical self. We have a mental self. We have an emotional self. So we also have a spiritual self. And so these are very simplistic ways or simplified ways to actually understand what's happening. And this is the result of this kind of layering from the arc of the descent of the human state into this realm, right? How does this figure in to the spiritual work, right? The main word to understand here, or term to understand in Sufism, is that all of this is encased in what we call the Nafs, right? Which is the individuality. So the individuality has all these levels of selfhood. So the Nafs is a combination of spirit and body. Once a spirit is placed into a body, that interface between pure consciousness, which stems from the divine source, and the physicality is what you could call psyche or ego self or nafs, right? Now, obviously in human development, it does not turn into an ego self until a particular stage in life, right? And we're aware of this in some of the psychosocial science. But nonetheless, all of this is a nafs, and it's an individuality, and it becomes responsible for its own inner work at some point, because it becomes aware if it doesn't do this inner work, it is overrun by lower desires, and all this has to do with the politics, one could say, of the nafs, right? The politics of the nafs, and as it is sometimes called in like the traditional text, like politics of the self, and the interactions of the different aspects of our central consciousness. And so the term here, along with nafs, is in mujahada. So the work that is being done is the mujahada, a struggling, a self-striving against or with ourselves to refine ourselves. There is an awareness that we must refine ourselves because there's an awareness that there's something in us that's aware that we are not just the outer form, or even our thoughts, or even our physical actions, or even our feelings. There's something that, and we may even be aware that we don't like how we're feeling. What is that entity that's aware of this? What is that substance? That's your real, most inmost real self. That's the Hakika Insaniya. That is the Latifa. That may still be lying, that may be obscured, but it's somehow sending intuitions that I am not this, right? And I need to work on myself. So all of this is part of the politics of the heart, right? I'm forgetting the Arabic word for politics here. In particular, that Imam Ghazali uses, yes, siyasat, that we would say in Urdu, right? Siyasat, or in Arabic, you could say like dal marbuta, just like silent. So siyasa, and it's a beautiful term that Imam Ghazali and many others use, the governance or like the politics of the heart, right? How it interacts with the bishop or intellect and the ego self or nafs and the more inner centers, right? And how this is a kind of politics, of experience. I like to call this a politics of subjective experience, right? The politics of the inner experience. And so the key term here is the mujahada, on the nafs. This is what we can call, because we are innately and always a spirit, we understand intuitively that we need to work on ourselves to get ourselves ordered. And when we are more ordered, there's a sense of fulfillment, at least temporarily, or we feel better, a relief. Right? All of that politics of experience is a proof that you are a pure soul or a pure spirit inside. All of that's a proof. If that wasn't the case, you would not objectively be having these insights. You would be among the animals, and you would feel the chaos and just express that anger and pounce, or embody a fear and stay isolated or protect your boundaries, etc. We have these feelings, these primal emotions in the lower self, and they're an important part of the human experience, but we can consciously integrate them due to a self-awareness. This is proof of spirit. This is proof of the ruh. And so this is the inner work that begins on multiple levels of the human soul, right? And so mujahada on the nafs, the spiritual nourishment for the nafs, as we could say, because why are we trying to do spiritual nourishment? It's simply to return ourselves or to awaken the spirit, the inner spirit, kind of in us. The spiritual nourishment for the nafs is the mujahada on it. And what are the four practices that are known in classical Islamic spirituality as the work that we do on the nafs? Do you know them? All right. So we'll start with isolation. So you're right. So isolation. By isolating our nafs, by detaching ourselves from the things that we're attached to, we begin to refine our nafs, to work on our tendencies, the desires. This is called uzla, as they say in the spiritual text. So isolation is the one that is usually first. Then we have silence, as you mentioned, to have the mujahada with our tongue, to first be silent, because it is the tongue that expresses our ego and our nafsaniya. And it reinforces this particular conscious identity of self. So to step away from worldly talk and to observe in silence, not only the effects of our outer chatter, but also the effects of our inner chatter, of the hadith and nafs, of the talking of the inner self, we begin to calm that down and refine that. Right? Because it's working on the assumptions of everything that is acquired in its life experiences, which reinforce an outer or an egoic self and often veil us from an inner spiritual self. Right? So silence then becomes a spiritual practice of mujahada to refine the nafs, the nafsani or the egoic consciousness. Right? So we have isolation, and this is the purpose of itikaf, right? To isolate ourselves from the world and our effects, the egoic effects that we have had on the world and the world on us, so that we can work. We created distance and a space, both outward and inward, to work to do this process. And then we have, from isolation and silence, we then have the one that really cuts at the root or challenges the root of the egoic energy. That by fasting, by refraining from food, and the physical energies or the nourishment that brings our physicality and strengthens the energy of the egoic consciousness, we begin to cut ourselves off from that and begin to open the possibility to spiritual nourishment, right? A move from physical and psychological to spiritual. So hunger is known in the Islamic tradition as a profound way to, and probably the most direct way, most potent way to curb nafs, to curb the energy of the nafs, right? In the things it loves, in the things it desires. It's shahawat, the hawa of the nafs. Very important. So all of its indulgences, when you fast, as you all know, because we're in Ramadan, the desire to act out certain or many tendencies or the desires of the nafs that it loves, its inclination becomes weakened by fasting. And you simply just don't feel like it because you don't have the energy for it. That gives you enough space internally to take a look at that and see if those inclinations and tendencies are actually healthy for you or not. And to step back and reflect on that and to perhaps refine and redirect. This is the virtue and the benefit of fasting on this level. A very potent practice for such a possibility, as the Prophet ﷺ stated that if you cannot marry, then fast often. He said this especially to the men because of the lustful kind of, because of the energy, right? The natural energy, I just don't want to say lust, right? Because lust is actually an internal state in Christian morality and spirituality. It also is in Islam, but it's a negative state. The natural appetite for the fulfillment of the sexual desire is natural. It needs to be directed in a sacred framework and a sacred context for higher purposes, but also for purposes of conviviality and intimacy for the psyches and the bodies of male and female, right? And so forth, right? But fasting does help curb the erotic energy. So this may be a better word because it's more neutral. Yes, it helps protect from acting out lust. It helps curb the erotic energy and may help us reintegrate that energy into more profound or greater forms of energy, like going from the erotic or from eros to like a loving energy, and then from there to a more spiritual energy, right? There can be this kind of integration from an eros to a devotional energy, whether that's to one's spouse or to the religion in ibadat, like meaning to God, right, and so forth. Right? There can be this kind of way to do this, and so fasting and hunger in particular helps curb the nafs and its tendencies and the desires of the nafs, not just for lust or the erotic energy, but for many other things, for a sense of status, because hunger humbles us, right? When we begin to see long enough that we are weak to without food. So if we are so weak without food, and now the drives for self-status and these things are being cut down, then what am I really? Should I really be identifying all the time with those things? Should I really be pursuing those things? Most certainly to the extent that it's not necessary to maintain a living, etc. But maybe I'm putting all my cards in the wrong place in terms of my energy. I need to take a look at this, that if I can be humbled like this, then what am I really? All of that was a kind of illusion if it can be cut like that. Right? This then leads to a contemplative insight of self-reflection, of Muhasaba. This is the power of hunger in terms of the fast when it is intentional, especially in this way. We don't force hunger for no reason, but we practice hunger in the name of God as a refraining and fasting, right? And if unfortunately, if one does not have the proper means, one is humbled outwardly by necessity, and it brings profound humility, right, for anyone, but especially for the one who does not have the means. And this is one of the meanings of why the poor will enter paradise first, right? This is a saying of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that the fuqara will enter paradise first, right? It really means those who are poor, who have been poor in this realm because Allah Ta'ala humbled them, and they have a high station inwardly and in the next life, by analogy, by prolongation. And because only the humble of heart enter paradise. Be ye a child and enter paradise, as Jesus says, right? You must have the heart of a child. You must be an open, humble, and pure and poor like that, in the spiritual sense. Right? And in the spiritual sense, it is really ultimately the fakir who is empty of self and poor before their Lord as a servant of God, who has the humble and the correct attitude of entering the paradisial presence of the divine presence, the paradisial state of the inner heart, like the awakened heart, where the divine presence resides. Right. So then we have, in terms of, so we said isolation, we said silence, we mentioned hunger, and then we have wakefulness, yaqaza, yakza, or we can say Muraqaba here as well. Wakefulness means to be alert and awake and open for God. Not just staying awake because we're having a good time. We know how that feels. Right? But actually being awake, it's a spiritual nafs in that it is refining it. It's allowing us to work with the nafs and its regular wants and needs of why it stays awake, its own personal or particular joys, and why we're now staying awake. Right? And there's beautiful texts on what element of the nafs, or its attachment to a certain thing that each of these practices works on. For example, isolation, right? And our attachment to the dunya, to the world, right? Silence as an awakening to Allah's presence, right? Hunger as a cutting off of the energies of nafs and the desire in particular, right? And then wakefulness and actually the shaitan, because the more we are alert in our wakefulness and vigilant, then the less shaitan can affect us. If we sustain that intention, right? Obviously, if you're staying up all night and you're not remembering God, worshiping, contemplating God in some way, being intentional in some way, your tendencies will take you to other places, right? Like there's hadiths about the three kinds of people at night, or the three kinds of even like the believers. There's a very profound hadith, actually not often mentioned, very powerful hadith, that there's those at night who act out their worldly desires, like the party people, right? I mean, like it's fine to party here and there. Like I'm not saying that don't go out and enjoy yourself and be thankful for the bounties of life that God gave you. I'm not saying that, but you know what I mean, right? In terms of the nightlife, right? There's three kinds of people, and it's amazing that the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned this. There's three kinds of people at night. There's the nightlife people, right? And there are those who sleep, and there are those who pray at night. Right? This is what the Prophet ﷺ, he specified in this beautiful hadith. Right? This really struck me as a teenager. Like as a teenager, I was very amazed by this hadith. I contemplated it very deeply in my own life of how am I living my nights, because I love to stay up at night. I still have this love, right? It's part of my kind of my mizaj, my just my habits and my constitution to be up kind of later. I love the still of the night. I connect with it and spiritually resonate with the still of the night. It's when I pray, or when I'm by myself, when I self-reflect, and I write, or even when I stretch and try to take care of my body. I'm just alone with my Lord, subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the still of the night that resonates with my inner secret with my heart. Right? So in any case, and the Prophet ﷺ stated that the one who sleeps is in the neutral, and if their intention is to wake up and pray, then this is khair, right? But at least they avoid harm, right? They avoid harming themselves and forgetting God, and weakening their religion with God. But of course, those who do wake up and pray at night, those who seek God at night, they are the real winners, right? Because they have this tendency to seek God. When the night is a symbol psychospiritually of the shadow, that we then begin acting out the unconscious or the suppressed tendencies of soul. Right? Like those who go out and have fun, they've been holding on to that desire, because in the day they have to work and they have to tend to what they need to tend to, and this is a way to pent out energy. Right? But the ones, and then those who are sleeping are acting appropriately because they're in a state of khair, because at every moment they're doing what's appropriate. They're working in the day, spending time with the family in the evening, and resting at night. This is khair and fitra. This is the fitra, right? This is the natural primordial state. So this is a very beautiful matter. But the one who makes enough time to rest and wake up and seek God, this has been in their heart, all day. That as they tend to God's work in the day, they seek their Lord at night. This is an amazing status. This we have here in these three spiritual types, three kinds of people in the night. The ashabul shimal, the ashabul yamin, and the ashabul muqarrabin, right? In other words, which the Quran speaks of spiritually, that you have the people of the left hand who will be resurrected and will be on the left side of the divine presence, if we can speak like this, and this people of the right hand who will be of the righteous. This is those who were acting appropriately at each stage of their life, or at each stage of the day and the night, according to the divine norm, and struggling with it, but seeking to maintain balance. This is a beautiful place, right? The people of the right hand. And then we have those who are brought near God, al-Muqarrabin, right? Those who are brought near. It's this category of seekers who seek God here and now, where the obvious would be to either rest, and then the worldly would be to enjoy yourself in the night where things are hidden and one can get away with things. In the night and the shadow, the psychic shadow, right? If we want to use this kind of terminology, where that which was suppressed inside is now being expressed, right? Or those who transcend this possibility to their own verticality, and that is those who seek God here and now in the night, right? Which is a complete inversion of this, to bring conscious light into the psychic night. SubhanAllah. If we want to use this kind of language. So I hope that's helpful. But so this would then be what is being done as a spiritual nourishment in terms of wakefulness, and all these practices on the Nafs. And it's an important element of refining and integrating the outer self and the mental self into the spiritual work. Right? This is my point of speaking of this, like this. Right? So I hope that makes sense. Along with that inner spiritual work, which is also an outer work, because if we need to serve others, to curb our ego and even our arrogance or whatever, or to learn how to open our hearts and serve others and feel good about this, that's a beautiful kind of outer work in which we're working on the Nafs, right? So this is the spiritual nourishment of the Nafs that doesn't know it, but is seeking spiritual enlightenment, because this Nafs in reality, in essence, is a spirit, but has forgotten its origin or is overwhelmed by its conditioning. This is why the nourishment is needed. This is why it is spiritually nourished by this kind of work, by this kind of what we call spiritual work. This is one level, the mujahada of the Nafs. Right? Another level, a more subtle level, is the mujahada of the intellect, of the aql. Well, what do I mean by this? Refining the intelligence, being more mindful. On one level, simply mindfulness, being more mindful of things, being more intentional. with things that we do. Bring this intentionality, the awakening of intellect, into the will, into our actions. But also that of learning, understanding, reading, comprehending, contemplating, kind of activating and exercising the intellect so that it becomes stronger and more one-pointed and more purposeful and refined, so that it can, in the hierarchy of the psychic faculties or the faculties of the human soul, it can begin aligning and directing this siyasat, this politics of the inner experience that we spoke of, right? Of the will and the affect, of our impulses and our will and the desires that we have. It is the intellect that can rein in on these, as you have a rein on a horse that you pull, right? This is function of intellect, to actually rein in on the animal self, on the lower self, and that desires that it has, by virtue of intellect, by virtue of direction, awareness, purpose, purposeful movement, and redirecting of the energies and movement of the lower self as the animal in the chariot, as we rein in on the horse. Right? Like that's a beautiful symbolism of what the intellect is. We can only do this when we are refining and exercising intellect in these ways. This is why educated people have a sense of refinement and discipline, because whether they know it or not, they've actually exercised their intellect, even in a worldly sense. You cannot be successful if you have not exercised your intellect in some way in the worldly life, let alone the spiritual life or the religious life. Right? As the Prophet ﷺ stated, that the stronger believer is the one who is intelligent enough to work for their akhirah and reflect on death. This is the intelligent of the believer. This is among the hadiths where the Prophet ﷺ was asked, please give us a quality of the strong believer. This is one of the riwayat. There's other ones which kind of indicate physical strength, but this riwayat indicates, this narration indicates exercising the intellect and reflecting on death. Right? This makes a believer stronger because they're exercising their intelligence vis-a-vis their faith and the embodiment of their faith. Right? So exercising the mujahada of the intellect, very important to align in proper hierarchy the faculties of the human soul, the intelligence, the will, and the affect. When the impulse determines our will, there's an inversion and a perversion eventually that happen. Right? You can take, for example, please forgive me, but for example, a sexual fetish or a sexual perversion. It is the trumping or the over-empowerment of an impulse that cannot be controlled anymore or reined in, that then perverts this faculty of alignment of the self. The one may even know that they don't like this fetish. For example, I'm just giving an extreme example, my apologies. Right? But to make this point, they may even be aware that I don't like this, but they're in a state of compulsion to act out a sexual instinct in a particular way. This is an example, perhaps an extreme one, but I would say relevant to the misappropriation of the hierarchy, the overdomination of the lower animal impulses that then that then override the will, that then weakens intellect. Because at some point you're trying to reason with yourself, but then you cave in. So strengthening the intellect and catching yourself saying, no, that's not appropriate. It's like reining in on the horse that, like the horse of the lower self, or the animal of the lower self that loves to graze in that direction, and it's bad for you. No, a'udhu billah. Right? This is the whole function of aql and aqilu, to bind and to rein in. Actually, this is one of the meanings of aql, which is so profound that aql means this, to bind, that which binds and reins in. There's hadiths that allude to this as well. Actually, really profound. That in the name itself is the function. Like in the meaning of the etymology of the name is its function. What the intellect does for insan, for the hakika insaniya, for the latifa insaniya. So the intellect itself is the latifa, as we were speaking of. Like we have the nafs, that is a latifa. We also have intellect, that's a latifa, a subtle center of consciousness, the intelligence. Once this is exercised, more one-pointed and strong, by reflection and contemplation and spiritual reading and scriptural reading, and even self-help reading, whatever it is, and like strengthening the certitude of your faith, of the articles of your faith. All this refines intellect, strengthens it, so that it can help further align and rein in the unconditioned will and the unconditioned impulse or affect and our emotions. We can regulate our emotions intentionally with the refined intellect, right? Emotional intelligence. Very important. So this is an important element of tazkiyah of the nafs to exercise, to have the mujahada of the aql, of the intellect. Right? I hope this is helpful. Once these are integrated, or as they are being integrated in the inner work, we have something even more subtle, and that is the spiritual heart, the qalb itself. And its spiritual nourishment is prayer, is meditation, is the invocation of the names of God. Other forms of spiritual work that help to awaken and strengthen and align your heart and open your heart. Right? In particular, in Islamic spirituality, it is the dhikrullah. Ala bi dhikrullah, ala bi dhikrillah tatma'innul qulub. Right? Verily, it is with the remembrance of God that hearts find rest and peace. So it is by the remembrance of God, in whatever way, shape, or form, by reflecting mentally or cognitively, by performing acts of worship, by invoking and or meditating on God, right? By being still for God, by sitting for God, by being present in your heart, and in everything that you do for God. All of this is a spiritual nourishment for the heart, for the qalb, just as refining your nafs with those 4 practices is a spiritual nourishment for the ego self. And just as exercising the intellect is also a nourishment, spiritual nourishment actually, for the nafs. And as in preparation to work with this in the spiritual life. The intellect is very important. So then we have the heart, right, which is considered another latifa. And so the invocation, the adhkar, the forms and the modalities of the remembrance of God, especially on the level of tariqah, are very central here to awaken the heart from its dormant negligence and heedlessness of the divine presence, because it's been conditioned by these lower centers that the attention has kind of occupied in our existence, in our present existence. Right? We're worried about the world. We're worried about status. We're worried about this and that. We desire something that's either halal or haram, and we're just inwardly we're not paying attention. We're ignoring our spiritual heart. It begins to become dormant and opaque by the sins accumulating of heedlessness and of actual ma'siyah, of disobedience to the divine will, and it will become hardened. This is a process in terms of spiritual nourishment and exercise that begins to heal the heart, awaken the heart, to melt the coldness and the ice around the heart, to thaw away at the psychic shell of forgetfulness and heedlessness and sin that has covered the spiritual heart and affected our emotional heart. Right? So this is the work that's done here by the dhikrullah. Then we could say something more subtle as a center is the inner secret, the inmost secret, the sir. So we went from the nafs to the aql to the qalb and then the sir. Why did I not say ruh? It is because all of this is ruh. Right? It's spiritual work. So this is ruhani nourishment, spiritual nourishment. The spirit is acting on every level in some way, in accordance to that level. When you're even exercising intentionally physically, that's actually spiritual work also, because you're bringing intentionality there. So hence, don't forget your body. Exercise your body with intention. you're actually calling upon intellect, and intellect is connected to spirit. Your body is independently connected to spirit, actually. This is why after a session of invocation or deep contemplation or prayer, you may sometimes see a subtle light on people's faces because they just become enlightened in some way. Like there's a spiritual light that's enlightened kind of in them, or there's a sense of flow in them. And sometimes you may see that like a particular person's face is, nowhere or illuminating, right? Or something beautiful has been done and God shines a light on their face. These are just signs of the spirit, in a sense, flowing in the body, all the spiritual blessings. Right? So on each level, there's spiritual work or spiritual exercise or an exercising of the spirit on each level of these subtleties. I hope I'm able to I'm bringing this all together, kind of for you all. And so we mentioned the sir, but each one of these is spirit in its own way. And then a final point here, as we've hit the 1 hour mark, gone a little bit over it, that as suggested, so we started with the Hakika Insaniya, and we could also say here the Latifa Insaniya, like the reality of the human state, of the human soul, and its deep, essential subtlety in God's presence, right? As spirit, as ruh. As the stages of your existence, unfold, as the stages of your human existence unfold, and we acquire subtle bodies that make these layerings come on this essential, subtle center of consciousness. The inner work that reverses this or works on each level, it's important to understand that in reality, the one and same only locus of consciousness is being worked on. Right? That, in other words, if you're predominated by the egoic consciousness, that is superimposed on the spiritual consciousness. It's just that outer consciousness is veiling or eclipsing the sun of the inner consciousness, and some work has to be done there, the polishing of the heart, as they say, or the refining of the nafs, to then open us to the possibility of becoming aware that there's a more essential or inward and comprehensive or encompassing center of consciousness. And this is a step-by-step kind of part of the spiritual work that just naturally occurs as one does the spiritual work, as one works with all these diverse spiritual practices in connection to an intentional community with the spiritual teacher who overlooks this also for the souls and just for the seekers, in a way that makes this process of the transformation of the heart efficient, right? And I would call this one locus of awareness, like in a general sense, the heart, capital H, right? In as much as the egoic consciousness is overwhelming that heart, then the heart is an ego self. In as much as the intellect has been awakened and it's being exercised in refining one's sense of morality and work and ethic and dignity and character, then that heart is an intellect. In as much as this intellect has submitted itself and integrated itself to revelation and to ritual worship, and strengthened its faith and certitude, and begun more spiritual practices, that heart becomes an awakened heart, a spiritual heart. And inasmuch as this heart has turned entirely back unto God and is in God's presence and is prostrating there and seeks to live from there, this heart has realized its inmost secret of the sir. So we go as a general heart, or as a qalb, let's just use that term, from a nafsani consciousness, from the nafs, to an intellectual or akli consciousness, to a fuadi consciousness, like the inner spiritual heart, like if I'm going to use the distinctions, right? Because if we're using the one same locus of consciousness as the heart, then this is the spiritual heart, which is called in the Quran the fuad, the inner spiritual heart of perception. This is what the fuad is. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke to the Prophet speaking of his fu'ad, his inner vision, his inner heart, did not waver in what it perceived, in what it saw, right? And we have the plural form of afida in Surah Al-Mulk, right? Can you say the verse? if you can. I know it's like towards the end. إِذَا قَلِيلًا مَا تَشْكُرُونَ. So how does that verse start? I'm trying to get to it in my memorization of the verses. So the first part of it, but in any case, that's where afida is. That is the plural of fu'ad, where God is saying that we gave them sama wal basara wal fu'ad, or wal afida, qalilan ma tashkurun, and we gave them, we existentiated them, we gave. Okay, say it again. والأبصار والأفئدة قليلا ما تشكرون. That, and we gave them, or we existentiated for them, what they're hearing and they're seeing, and their inner perceiving of the hearts, أفئدة, in the plural, and very little do they give thanks. This is a powerful, beautiful verse, but in it is implicit that if you want to activate your inner heart, then give more thanks, right? Like there's a subtle instruction here, actually. Yeah, and even for your sight, be thankful for your outer sight, for your outer hearing, and connect these to your inner perceiving through the attitude of gratitude, and you will enhance all of these abilities, these faculties of the human selfhood, right? And so this is the inner heart. My point is inner heart, and these are terms that are found in the revelation, in the Quran itself. And then we have the sir, like as we mentioned. This, in a nutshell, is the work that is done, the inner or the spiritual work that is done on this latifa insaniya, so that it can return to its haqiqa. After it has acquired these multiple dimensions or layers of selfhood that both veil and potentially unveil its inmost possibility and its inmost the potential and meaning as the state of the human soul, which is made to know God intimately and to embody that knowing very beautifully and prophetically. This is the purpose of suluk and the path is nothing other than these spiritual exercises that serve to awaken again, as if in reversal, this process where we went from the descent to outwardness of these consciousnesses, veiling each level each time, to the ascent that is like a kind of returning inward to awaken the inner centers of the soul, to realize they were always one and only one center. This latifa and hakika insaniya. Kulli قولي هذا واستغفر الله ولكم ولسائر المسلمين واستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. I hope I was able to. This ends my talk on this subject, and inshallah tomorrow we will try to bring a comprehensiveness to this whole process in the context of the prophetic presence, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I'll read here some of the comments. I guess I'm following them kind of later. I'm sorry. That's interesting. There was a retracted kind of message. In Islamic theology, there is a time and a place for everything. Yes, indeed. I wanted to mention this, but there's a time and place for these subjects. This subject, although all these are intertwined, we are speaking of suluk and spiritual wayfaring, but all these subjects in Islam are very intertwined, and once you appreciate this particular subject of the spiritual journeying and its relevance to the meaning of your life, your purpose, then all the other subjects are interrelated to this subject. This is really the central subject, right? What Rumi calls the root of the root of the root of the religion, or the asal of the asal of the deen, or the heart or the heart or the heart of the religion, right? This is really the root of the root of the root of all sciences, of Islamic sciences. The reality of insan, the hakika insaniya, the latifa insaniya. This is what it's all about. Your remembrance of God is for this. Your praying, your worship is for this. Of course, for Allah. I'm not saying it's for that and not for that stuff for Allah. But insofar as it is allowing you to awaken to your real potential as what you were always meant to be by the intention of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the point, right? Alhamdulillah. Yes, alhamdulillah. When I was working as a night nurse, I felt that the nights have something really special, and the veil to the spiritual world is very thin. Yes, especially when a patient was in the process of dying. Yes, there is this sense of the lightness and the transparency of those experiences, especially at night. And I've also experienced that. I know you have some experience, say in palliative care and nursing and other forms of nursing as a resident and as a doctor. I'm a physician now, almost 20 years now, as an attending. I've had my fair share of experiences of evaluating and managing the dying, and at night, in the middle of the night, on call as a resident and as then an attending or whatever. I'm in private practice, and have been for kind of ever since residency. But I have that experience, and wonderful, amazing experience of self reflection on this reality of death. And especially in the tahajjud time kind of periods, just the transparency of life and of the spiritual realm and our realm. So very beautiful times, and deep moments of contemplation, even at work. So I appreciate what you have said as a nurse. Thank you very much for that. And we will end here, inshallah. Is there any comment that anyone wanted to make, if you remember what you wanted to say an hour ago? So we'll stop here. Was this sufficient, Sidi? All right. Okay. Alhamdulillah. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Maliki yawmiddin. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Thank you for your patience, everyone. Thank you for attending.